there are two things to watch. One, the virus is mutating and still roaming around the world. Therefore, we have to concentrate on vaccinations everywhere for everyone, a fair shot. Two, we see dangerous divergence with a small group of economies, the US, China, and a couple of other emerging market advanced economies, moving to their pre-COVID levels by the end of this year, and the rest of the world being behind. Low-income countries, vulnerable countries, tourism-dependent, small islands, they are all diverging vis-a-vis the rest.
Viruses are no respecters of borders, and until the world really is vaccinated, we're all going to be at risk of new mutations, and we won't be able to really resume activity with confidence all around the world. So it's not only the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do, as the Director General just said.
Even with the hurricanes and everything, and we didn't evacuate.
The directions for who needs to evacuate and the boundaries have been less than accurate. You know, they're just kind of hard to understand.